This part, I'm going to go ahead and read this part here because it's important to understand this context. So, despite the difficulties Caesar experienced in his first expedition to Britain, because his conquest of Gaul seemed secure, Caesar decided to attempt a second expedition to Britain the next summer. Again, Caesar experienced some military success before he returned to the mainland toward the end of the summer campaigning season. He then sent the men to their winter quarters, and this is when the trouble began. Because of a drought, and thus a smaller than usual harvest, he had to spread the army out over a larger geographical area. Because it is divided into smaller units, the Roman army appears more vulnerable to the native inhabitants, and the Belgic tribes in the northeastern Gaul decide to take advantage of the opportunity to revolt. And you can see how spread out they are here. So the different troops are spread pretty far from each other, and these are the names of the leaders that are. And this is where the revolt begins, and then it moves over to Cicero afterwards. In the passages that follow, you'll read about Caesar's ultimately successful operations to suppress this revolt against Roman rule. Although most of the action takes place while Caesar is not present, Caesar remains a force throughout the narrative. On the one hand, of course, because he tells the story, but even if we put that obvious fact aside, Caesar is mentioned frequently. Ambiorix, a leader of the Eubrones, leads an attack on the winter quarters, commanded by Quintus Titurius Sabinus and Lucius Aurunculeius Cata, after which he promises them safe passage from his people's territory. Ambiorix's speech is part of an elaborate plan to lure the Romans into an ambush, but Caesar puts praise of Caesar into Ambiorix's speech. Caesar also inserts knowing and disparaging remarks about Sabinus into the narrative, so that the readers will blame not Caesar, but Caesar's lieutenants for the disaster. The conduct of Sabinus and Cotta is also compared unfavorably with the conduct of the lieutenant Quintus Tullius Cicero when Ambiorix tries the same trick at his camp. Finally, we see Caesar rush to rescue Cicero's camp after Caesar gets word of the attacks on winter quarters. Even military setbacks contribute, at least in Caesar's narrative, to a portrait of Caesar as the consummate military leader. And in the end, Caesar did reestablish military control. With the ships having been drawn up, and with a meeting or council of the Gauls having been completed at Samarobrevia, that's evocative, and in the footnote you can see that Caesar would have these meetings at the end in the fall, and with all of the Gauls, and get troops from them, kind of close off the year and figure out how they're feeling before he would put all of his troops away for the winter. Because that year the grain in Gaul, on account of the dryness, had come forth more narrowly, he is compelled, as in Caesar is compelled, otherwise than in previous years, to locate or to put together the troops the army into winter quarters, or in winter quarters. The legions into many states to distribute, so he's compelled to distribute the legions into many states, out of which legions, one amongst the Moroni, to be led by Gaius Fabius the legate, he gave. Another amongst the Nervi to Quintus Cicero, a third among the Asubi to Lucius Roscius, a fourth in the Remi, amongst the Remi, who with Titus Labienus on the border or on the boundary of the Treveri, he ordered to winter. Three amongst the Bellovaci he located. To these are for these Marcus Crassus as quaestor, Lucius Venantius Plancus, and Gaius Stravonius he made as legates. One legion which nearby across which he had conscripted nearby across the Padua, and the 5 cohorts amongst the Eubroни, of which the greatest part is between the Mosa and the Rhine, who under the authority of Ambiorix and Coutovalci he sent. So all of these accusatives he sent, and all of these other parts are descriptions of what they're like. To these soldiers, Quintus Titurius Sabinus and Lucius Aurunculeius Cotta, he ordered to be in charge of as legates. To this point, with the legions having been distributed, or in this way, but up to this way, that with the legions having been distributed, most easily he estimated himself to be able to remedy for the lack of grain. And of all these legions, nevertheless, the winter quarters, besides that one which to Lucius Rasius in the most peaceful and quiet place to be led he had given, within 100 miles they were being contained. So all the winter camps were within 100 miles of each other. He himself, meanwhile, until he had known the legions collected together and the winter camps having been fortified, until he knew that the winter camps were fortified, in Gaul he decided to delay. There was amongst the Carnuti in the highest place born Tasgestius, whose ancestors in his own state had held the rule. To this one, Caesar, on account of his virtue and on account of his benevolence toward him, because in all wars he had been of use, his singular work had been of great use. He reestablished the place of his ancestors, so he put this guy back in the power which his ancestors had had before. Already now 3 years, ruling now for 3 years, hostile ones, with many as authors, with many from the state as authors, secretly they killed him. So many people conspired secretly from the state, and they killed this ruler that Caesar had put in charge. This matter was carried to Caesar. He having feared, since this previous murder was pertaining to many, lest their state with a rebellion would defect or would fall away, Lucius Plancus with a legion from Belgia, swiftly into the Carnuti, he orders to set out and there to winter. And when he had known by the work of whom or by whose work Targestus was killed, these ones having been comprehended to him to return. So these are all the things that he ordered, those ones having been comprehended to him to return. So he told them to go out and catch the guys who killed him. Meanwhile, with all the legates and with all the quaestors to whom he had given legions, he was made by all the legates and by all the quaestors, he was made more certain. And what was he made more certain of? Them to have arrived into winter camps, and the place for wintering to be fortified.